Well, we know a lot about what the FMR1 gene's protein, FMRP, does. And this is we call it a mother protein because it does so many things. And when it is not there, there's a lot of different types of dysregulation in many pathways. For instance, it's a regulator of translation for hundreds of genes, and maybe about 30% of the genes that cause autism when mutated. It can help a little bit with transcription, but it also is a regulator of synaptic plasticity, and it also controls several ion channels, including the BK channel or the big potassium channel, which it modulates. So when FMRP is missing, there's a lack of modulation for these channels. There's a GABA deficit in the receptors and just the level of GABA A and B. There's also upregulation of the mTOR pathway and upregulation of the activity of the insulin receptor, and dopamine pathways get dysregulated also. So this opens the doors for a variety of targeted treatments that can help reverse some of these neurobiological abnormalities. One medication that has been very successful is CBD or cannabidiol. The company Zynerba, which was recently bought by Harmony, they make a CBD ointment called Zyn-002 that you put topically on the arms or on the thighs. And this upregulates the GABA pathway. This helps with seizures. It helps with sleep, but perhaps most importantly, it helps with anxiety. And a controlled trial of CBD showed that it was efficacious for a subtest on the ABC checklist called social avoidance. And it was significantly beneficial with those that had 90% or greater degree of methylation of their full mutation. You know that Fragile X syndrome is caused by a full mutation greater than 200 CGG repeats before the Fragile X gene in the promoter region, and that causes the gene to methylate and turn off so that little or no messenger RNA is produced, and that leads to little or no protein. Of course, females produce about half as much protein because they have a normal X that is producing protein, so they're less affected by Fragile X syndrome in terms of cognitive impairment. But most boys with Fragile X syndrome have mild or more severe intellectual disability and behavior problems too, like anxiety, hyperactivity. About 60% have autism. So CBD is quite helpful for anxiety. It's also helpful for social interactions. And it can improve social interactions and help the families be able to take their kids out to restaurants and other places where they might have had a tantrum or a behavior outburst. So CBD is good. They're doing another study called the Reconnect study, which is another controlled trial with higher doses and farther into the adult range. So hopefully this CBD ointment called Zyn-002 will be FDA approved in the near future. Now, another pathway that's dysregulated is the cyclic AMP pathway. So the cyclic AMP levels are very low in Fragile X. And another targeted treatment called a PDE4D inhibitor can inhibit the enzyme that breaks down cyclic AMP. So when you use that PDE4D inhibitor called zatolamast, then the level of cyclic AMP increases. And that can help with synaptic connections. And the first study done on adults with Fragile X demonstrated that cognition, as measured by the NIH toolbox, was improved. So not only was their level of crystallized intelligence but also their ability to read and understand language was improved too. So many people are excited about that. Now the Tetra company, which is owned by Shinogi, it's a pharmaceutical company, I think out of Japan. Anyway, they have now started an adolescent study that begins at 9 years of age, and then it can go through adulthood up to about 45 years of age. So not only is there a control trial, but there's an open label study of zatolimumab, the tetra medication. Another medication that we think is helpful for Fragile X is metformin. So metformin is a biguanine medication. It's been used for centuries because even the ancient Egyptians used a plant called French lilac to help with diabetes-like diseases. Then it was rediscovered in 1918, thought to help with malaria, and also thought to help with influenza infections. It actually does help with COVID infections. But in 1954, it was introduced as a treatment for diabetes. And it does lower blood sugar. And this is particularly helpful for type 2 diabetes. And it was approved to be used in the US in 1995. And then a long-acting form came out in 2000. But what was shown in animal studies first is that the mTOR pathway, this is downstream of the insulin receptor, is upregulated in Fragile X. And metformin lowers that mTOR pathway. In anecdotal studies and in open label trials, this was very helpful for improving language and behavior in Fragile X syndrome. And now it will, we hope to get the results of a 3-center controlled trial by the end of this month or early next month. So we should have the results of a controlled trial of metformin. But I tend to use metformin as young as 2 years of age, and then gradually increase the dose. The middle childhood dose is about 500 milligrams twice a day. And I think it can improve language and behavior and mood stabilization. And in some of our longitudinal follow-up studies, it can prevent the IQ decline that can occur in individuals with Fragile X syndrome through childhood and through adolescence. So we're quite pleased with these 3 medications. Of course, stimulant medications can help with the processing in the dopamine pathway. We use a lot of SSRIs that can help with early language development, and controlled trials of sertraline, which is an SSRI, have been helpful for young children between the ages of 2 to 6 years of age. So there's many medications used in Fragile X syndrome. I've mentioned the targeted treatments, but also if there's a lot of aggression, the atypical antipsychotics like Abilify or risperidone can help with aggression. Guanfacine is an alpha-1 agonist that can calm down hyperarousal to sensory stimuli. There should be new drugs coming out next year, which can help with that BK channel overactivation, which sometimes can cause outburst behavior. So there's many things that can be done for targeted treatments and regular treatments in Fragile X syndrome, but also behavioral interventions are very helpful. Speech and language therapy, OT therapy, and PT therapy can help the motor problems and the language deficits in Fragile X syndrome. The biggest highlight are the targeted treatments, including CBD, tetra, and metformin. Well, I think it can reassure doctors that there are good treatments out there for Fragile X syndrome, and that they have to really spend time in considering Fragile X and in ordering the test, so that individuals with autism or intellectual disability, they should all get a Fragile X DNA test. And then if they turn out to have the full mutation, these medications can be very helpful to them. Okay, so there's been many meds that have been tried in autism, but have not been successful because autism is a very heterogeneous disorder. Okay, so there's hundreds of different types of mutations that can lead to autism. And so when you find a child with autism, you want to do genetic testing first to rule out Fragile X syndrome, because if that's positive, the medications that I mentioned could be very helpful. But then you want to do a CGH array or even whole genome sequencing to find out what is the genetic cause of this autism that you're seeing. Now, medication like an SSRI sometimes can be very helpful for some types of autism, but not for other types. Sometimes a stimulant medication can help with attention and focus and concentration. There may be other forms of autism that have a low FMRP level, even though they don't have a Fragile X mutation. And actually, brain studies have shown that the level of FMRP in the brain of individuals with autism, or in the brain of individuals with schizophrenia, or major depression, or bipolar disorder, they're all deficient in the level of the FMR1 protein, even when they don't have a Fragile X mutation. So we're measuring FMRP levels in other forms of autism to find out which forms are deficient in FMRP levels, even though they don't have a Fragile X mutation. Because if they're deficient in FMRP, that suggests that either CBD or maybe metformin or maybe even the tetra drug could be very helpful for them too. So I think that's a new avenue to think about in Fragile X, studying which type of autism you are working with. And that's absolutely another reason to do genetic testing in autism. And so we think that individuals with SHANK3 may be deficient in FMRP and 15q duplication, and maybe some individuals with tuberous sclerosis could be deficient in FMRP because the neurons are actually deficient in FMRP. So that means that a whole world of targeted treatments for Fragile X could be beneficial for them. So your journal, may want to look at other subtypes of autism and what medications seem to work best. Arbaclofen is a medication that may work for a subgroup of individuals with autism. I think it is very helpful for Fragile X, but I think the more you can publish about new treatments for different forms of autism, the better your journal will be, and the more clinicians will read it to find out what treatments are beneficial.